Hello, I'm Olivia Mattis, and I'm so happy to welcome you today to our program on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. So for the last 3 years, we've been having these programs on Sundays. Many of you are faithful attendees, and those of you who are new today, I hope you will become a faithful attendee because we present stories of hope and inspiration, and we all need such stories in our lives. Today, we present you with the story of a Jewish hero whose name was Solomon Sally Noach, who was a Dutchman living in France and who performed his rescue action in France. And now I need to thank my friend and colleague, Ella Andrisa. It was Ella who first brought the story to me, to the foundation, and introduced me to Solomon's son, Jacques Noach, that you'll meet in a little bit. And it was thanks to Jacques that I saw the beautiful film that you all saw today. And I said, this is going to be just perfect for our program. So thank you, Ella. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers. Our first speaker will be the historian and author, Dr. Mordechai Paldiel, who serves on our board of directors, who was for 24 years at Yad Vashem, and also who serves on a very important committee associated with the B'nai B'rith organization. And this is a committee that recognizes Jewish rescuers during the Holocaust. And Sally Noach is one such rescuer. So he's here not wearing his Yad Vashem hat or even his Sousa Mendes hat, but he's here to talk about Jewish rescue of Jews during World War II. After Dr. Paldiel, we will hear from Jacques Noach, who has become the world's expert on his father's story. He was behind the film that you saw. He wrote a book. He has a website. He is bringing this lost story to wide attention. He's really rescuing this piece of history, and we owe him a lot because of that. And our third speaker, I think, is one of the most interesting people I've met in my life. He's had the most remarkable life story that he's going to encapsulate for you in a 10-minute period of time. He was a Jewish race car driver, the fastest Jew in the world, they called him. But he had a whole life before that happened. So he was personally rescued by Sally Noach, and he's here to give you a first-person, first-hand testimonial and let you into what was or what has been and continues to be a most extraordinary life. So right now, let me turn the floor over to Dr. Mordechai Paldiel. Mordechai, it's your turn.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome, everyone. So we're not talking about a story that is happening in France. So let's have a look at the map of France in 1940. So it's a very interesting case in France. You see all these different colors. France is the only country that was defeated by Germany, and yet it was not fully occupied by the Germans, at least for the first 2 years. The Germans allowed the French to have a government in a part of France, the southeastern part of France, with a headquarters in the city of Vichy. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as Vichy France. So 2/3 of France were the occupied zone, especially that part which faced England. You can see that the United Kingdom, because Germany and England were still at war. And the other one with the blue color is what is called the free zone, although the government there, the Vichy government, had to collaborate with the Germans. The Germans were the overall masters, but they have a lot of freedoms there. So our story takes place in one of the largest city in this Vichy zone. It's called Lyon. very large city there. What you see here, the green, that's the Italian zone, but that took place later on in 1943. But in 1949 to 1943, both the blue and the green were as part of Vichy France. So Vichy France had its own government. Now, if you look at the map, I'm sure you're familiar with the map of France. To the north is Belgium, and to the north of Belgium is the Netherlands, otherwise known as Holland. And Sally Noach, our hero, comes from Holland. He was in business, and he happened to be in Lyon. He happened to be in France when France collapsed. And here you have Germany, you have Switzerland, and Italy. I just want to say a few more words before we go to the next slide. Germany was defeated France, and the French it was a humiliating defeat in 6 weeks. It took the Germans 6 weeks to defeat the French army. And that was very painful for the French, not that they were defeated, but in 6 weeks, so fast, the whole army, the proud French army, the army of Napoleon, the army that held back the Germans in World War I, was defeated. And so they were very frustrated and downhearted, and they were looking for a scapegoat. And of course, when you look for a scapegoat, there were the Jews in France, because there was already anti-Semitism in France before the war began. And but let's go to the next slide. So the new government of Vichy France was led by a man who was a hero of World War I. His name is Philippe Pétain. He was a marshal now, and he is the man that led the French army that stopped the Germans in a famous battle in World War I, the Battle of Verdun. And he took over the power. He became the head of state of Vichy France. And he was greeted, most Frenchmen held down to him. They believed that he is the man that would save whatever could be saved for what was left of France. So here you see Pétain in Lyon and in Marseille, the other city. As you can see in in Lyon, he is greeted, and they even give him the Hitler salute, the Nazi salute. It's very, very uncommon for Frenchmen to give the Nazi salute. That's on the left. And on the right, here he is in Marseille, and he is greeted by the Bishop of Marseille. Again, Pétain, dressed in military attire. Otherwise, he would be dressed in civilian attire. But he was considered the hero that would somehow save France and return France to its former glory, in collaboration with Germany, because it had seemed in 1940 that Germany had won the war. Germany had defeated France. It had defeated the British Army, which had to evacuate its army in Dunkirk. The United States and the Soviet Union were not at war, so it seemed that the war was over and Hitler had won. That was the situation in 1940, where the story of Sally Noach begins. Next slide. Okay, so right away, the Vichy government issued anti-Jewish laws, not at the demand even of the Germans. The Germans were surprised that the Vichy government took the first step in issuing the laws placing the Jews in the second category, turning the Jews into second-class citizens. So you can see the date here on top right, 23 October 1940. It's called the Statute of the Jews is promulgated, okay? And look at this, it says in French, Israël est désormais exclu de toute fonction publique. In other words, no Jews can hold on to public jobs in the government, jobs in the police, in the universities, in journalism, in cinema, okay? They are reduced to a lower status. What you don't see here is that Jews in France who had not yet become French citizens, they were refugees, they were rounded up and they were placed in internment camps. You may have heard of Gurs, Rivesaltes, Camp de Mille, and some others. So there were thousands of Jews imprisoned by the French. And this is not with the German proddings. This is the French government itself taking these first anti-Jewish steps. But I have to add, that's as far as the French government went. All Jews had to register at the police. All Jews had to have the word Juif on their ID cards. You could not go from one city to another without permission, but this is as far as the French went. And let's see some of the anti-Jewish laws passed by the French. Okay, and I want to read this. The government passed its first widespread anti-Jewish legislation. This included an ever stricter definition of who was a Jew than the Nazis allowed. In other words, a stricter interpretation. Under the Vichy, someone was Jewish if he or she had 3 Jewish grandparents, or 2 Jewish grandparents if his or her spouse was also Jewish. Now, the first Jewish law called for cutback in Jewish involvement in the French society. Jews were to be excluded from the army. Okay, the Germans allowed the French still to have a small army. Okay, no Jews in the army, no officers in the army and in the police, no Jews in top government administration posts, and any other job that influenced public opinion. They were only allowed to hold low-level public service jobs if they had fought in World War I or distinguished themselves in battle in 1939-40. These are the first few months when France was at war with Germany in World War II. And they were limited within liberal professions. In other words, Jews could not teach at universities. And Jewish students who wanted to go to universities, there was what is called the numerus clausus, only a few of them. But Jewish children could still go to public school. So it was a kind of a anti-Semitism, an all-time anti-Semitism. French anti-Semitism went so far on the claim that Jews were not really Frenchmen. They were different, and therefore they should not enjoy the privileges and the benefits like all real bloody Frenchmen. And this is as far as they went. Sally Noach began to work in Lyon at that time under Vichy. Now, for more about Sally Noach, we have his son, who has written a lot about his father, Jacques Noach, and he will tell us more about what his father did to save Jews as well as non-Jews arrested by the Vichy regime. So, Jacques Noach, the floor is yours. Take it.
Good. Thank you, Mordecai. Thank you for your introduction and kind words. And I would like to thank the Susan Mendes Foundation, and particularly Olivia Mattis and Ella Andriessen, for giving me the opportunity to say something about the research I have done into the Sally Noach file. I came to shocking revelations about the support the Dutch refugees received from the Dutch government in exile in London. If it had been up to the officials, anyone who made the dangerous journey to France would have been immediately sent back to the occupied Netherlands. The Engelandvaders were often asked by these representatives of the Dutch government, why did you leave Holland in the first place? And it is hard to believe nearly 80 years after liberation, but anyone who knocked on the door of the Dutch authorities in France around March 1942 received 500 French francs to return to the Netherlands. Anyone who wanted to travel onward to Spain and England, and thus to freedom, received nothing. There was also undeniable anti-Semitism. The Consul General of the Netherlands in France said, Jewish refugees are inferior. In 2022, I published my book about my father's story, Het Ongeloof, the Dutch title, and in English I translated it into Disbelief. I've done extensive research into the Sally Noach file of the Dutch wartime government, and as mentioned, I found shocking information about the support the government provided the Dutch refugees. There was a sense of disbelief about my father's actions. Did it all happen? The evidence that it did happen was already widely available to the relevant authorities during the Second World War, which my book also confirms. But his actions were nevertheless still questions. I therefore choose the title disbelief. Why did they not believe my father's actions? My father was one of the few who was openly critical of the operations of the Dutch government during the Second World War. He was not acknowledged for his actions. And we have a video clip coming up now.
In het onbezette deel van Frankrijk, dat onbezet zou blijven tot 11 november 1942, bevonden zich duizenden gevluchte en gestrande, vaak wanhopige Nederlanders. De meeste hier in de stad Lyon, uiteraard illegaal. Hulp van officiële Nederlandse zijde werd niet of nauwelijks gegeven. Maar één man verrichtte wonderen, Sally Noach.
As you've just heard, the reporter speaks plain language. Yet, during the war, my father was denounced as a liar, a notorious black marketer, and a charlatan in London, where Queen Wilhelmina and her government during the first days of the war had fled to. Why was he mullered in government circles? When my father reached Lyon in September 40, he contacted the honorary consul of the Netherlands. It was decided that he would act as a volunteer. My father, who was never officially appointed, never sworn in, and had absolutely no experience of consular or diplomatic work, only had his common sense to guide him. But he was strongly driven by his compassion for people in need and became an acting consul of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. His archive contains many letters written by the people he helped to escape. These letters are published on my website, sallynoach.com. My father is also often mentioned in books and travel journals written by the Engelandvaders and the Jewish refugees. I quote from one of the many letters from the Engelandvaders who managed to escape thanks to my father. The man in question was waiting to be convicted of spying when my father rescued him from the hands of the Gestapo. And I quote, "Mr. Noach, I owe my freedom and therefore my life to you." Eventually, also my father had to escape. He arrived in England on the 5th of December 1942 via Spain and Portugal. And there he was welcomed as a hero by the many Engelandvaders he had helped and who had also made it to London. They appointed him an honorary member of their Oranjehaven Club. And he was received by Queen Wilhelmina, who fled to England with her government at the outbreak of war in May 40. Somehow, a special relationship developed between my father and this queen, who was not known for drawing attention to the fate of the Jews in the Netherlands. During their first encounter, she asked him about his war experiences. However, she does not get the usual politically correct reply, as my father said, "Your Majesty, shall I first tell you a joke?" The ice was broken. As one historian writes, there was really only one Dutch Jew in London with whom Queen Wilhelmina had regular contact and whom she trusted completely. He trusted her and she trusted him more than the many bootlickers and job hunters around her. A few authors believe that my father may not have been important, but he was influential. But according to the Dutch government, my father was no hero. He had written a highly critical report about the attitude of the Dutch governmental representative in France and Spain, and this report was not welcomed. His report, typed with narrow line spacing, covered 8.5 sheets of paper and had a huge impact. My father handed this report in person to the Queen, as she was the person who asked for it. A few days later, he was invited to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he was received by none other than the Minister of Foreign Affairs himself. It was not a particularly warm meeting because the minister felt excluded since the report covered matters relating to his ministry, but he had felt bypassed as it had been delivered directly to the Queen. And the atmosphere did not get any better when my father said, "Your Excellency, you're a public servant, a very high public servant. I'm a salesman. And when I want to sell something, I go straight to the director and not to an employee with a power of attorney." Two worlds collided, the world of the young Jewish salesman who found himself facing a ruthless enemy, and the world of the gentleman of the hyper-correct school of the Dutch consular and diplomatic service. When my father highlighted to the Dutch authorities that the enemy also does not comply with the rules, he was told that the Dutch are too decent for that. Later on, and as suggested by Queen Wilhelmina, my father submitted a claim for the expenses he had incurred. Eventually, he was told that he was supposed to take this claim to the War Office, where he was informed that he had not been instructed to do what he had seen fit to do. In response to this, my father told the Minister of Defense, "Your Excellency, you and I are in the same boat. I did it because there was no one else. There was no choice. If they had had more choice in London, they would have never appointed you to become minister." The relationship between my father and the Dutch government never recovered, neither then nor after the war. When Queen Wilhelmina wanted to honor my father for his marriage, the Dutch government prevented that. After all, awarding a royal honor mainly meant the recognition of his marriage, but also the acknowledgement of the objections he reported involving a number of senior officials of the Foreign Affairs. And I will give an example what I found in the National Archives. The chairman of the Dutch Red Cross Society wrote in a letter that what was attributed to my father was not true at all. All Sally Noach had done was collecting Dutch people whose liberation had been brought about by others. On screen now, you see a list of men, women and children my father helped during his stay in London and surrounding area. This list is still not complete, but it gives a good idea of the number of people he helped in various ways on their way to freedom during September 40, September 42. Either by releasing them from the camps or prisons, welcoming them into his home, feeding them, and or providing them with money, advice, and travel documents. And the next clip, we will see on December 28, 1969, on December 28, 1969, and that was his 60th birthday, my father finally received a royal honor. He was given the Cross of Honor of the Order of the House of Orange. Awarding this was a completely personal matter for the head of the House of Orange. My father received the Cross of Honor from Queen Juliana and Prince Bernhard, whilst the government completely disregarded him. The documentary you have seen about the life of my father came about entirely because of the initiatives of my younger sister, Irene, from idea to financing. And dear sister, I know you're attending the event. I'm very grateful to you for doing that. I got the idea of naming a park in Israel after my father and contacted the Jewish National Fund, the institution involved in planting trees and creating forests in Israel. They were immediately enthusiastic and ensured for this initiative to become a reality. The festive opening ceremony took place on Thursday, the 2nd of May, 2019, so 4 years ago. Yom HaShoah it was. And Yom HaShoah is not only a memorial for the countless people who disappeared in the deep darkness of the Shoah, but it is also a tribute to the heroes. And I spoke about this connection at the opening of the Sally Noach Park in Haifa. And we have a video clip for that.
Call it Yom HaShoah, the Day of Destruction. The full name, however, is Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, Holocaust, Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance. Hagvura. Hagvura incorporates the stem of Gibor, which means hero. Our father, Sally Noach, was one such hero.
And through my research, I have learned what really happened during the time of my father's actions, much more than he has ever been aware of during his lifetime. I have discovered things my father never got to find out. It has given me a disturbing picture. He often said, an award won't feed us. He was promised to receive a high honor, but it was prevented by the government. If the government had acknowledged his actions, they would have acknowledged that they were wrong. My father's response, the people I saved have all received an honor. I have received my award through theirs. By doing my own research, I can now see it all in a different light. I now know exactly what happened to my father. I never questioned his story. and my research has only confirmed his story, which made me writing a book much easier. Now I can look at it more impartial. I now have documented evidence that his story was correct. I like to end by saying that I dedicated my book to my father's 7 grandchildren, and written in my book my advice to them to let their grandfather's actions be guidance for all their thoughts and actions. And the opening in my book starts with the following statement from the Talmud: "He who saves one life saves a whole world." A beautiful Jewish expression. Thank you very much for your time and giving me this platform to talk about my father. Thank you, Matthew and Valentin, for your excellent technical support. And let me now introduce my good old friend, Herman Veder, who, along with his family, has been rescued by my father. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Herman Veder. And before I continue, I would like to thank all of the readers that are watching this Zoom meeting. I'm originally from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And in 1942, my parents asked my grandfather and grandmother to join us to escape to Switzerland. My grandfather told my father, "I survived World War I. This war will be over in a few days." Not too long after that, they were picked up by the Germans and transported to Bergen-Belsen, a concentration camp where they died. The Veder family has lived in the Netherlands prior than Napoleon decreed for everyone to have a last name in August 1811. My grandfather used to be the president of the Jewish congregation of Amsterdam and the Parnas of the called Big Synagogue. Today, this building is the Jewish Museum for Amsterdam. As usual, the Queen of the Netherlands once a year would visit the 60,000 Jews living in Amsterdam. This also happens on April the 1st, 1924, on the picture that you're seeing now. The big Seder dish, about 15 inches in diameter and made in Lyon, France, was given to my grandfather as a gift from Queen Wilhelmina. The dish came back after World War II from somewhere and used at our home every Passover. My father donated this dish to the museum prior to his death. So when you visit Amsterdam one day, you will see this in the museum. And that's where the place was supposed to be. We escaped September 1942 by train, and gypsies smuggled us out the way to France. And that's where the problem started. We had to travel by ourselves, and with help from a Catholic priest, we did make it to Lyon, where we were arrested and transported to the local jail. We were all separated, and I ended up in a small cell with about 24 men, and I was only 7 years old. In the meantime, without any knowledge, Sally Noach falsified documents, and where the religion, Jewish, changed into Calvinist or Protestant, like we call it today. The Germans let us out, but we had to stay in a very small village where my father had to show his face daily to the police. One day when he entered the police office, he saw our 4 passports on the desk, and the police was watching the other way, so he took them, the passports, and we disappeared to try and travel to Portugal, like Sally Noach told us, to do after we came out of jail. By train, we made it to the French and Spanish border, but we had to walk the Pyrenees mountains for a few days. And instead of eating blackberries, I ate rabbit feces and got deadly ill with typhoid. I recovered pretty soon, and we were able to get to Lisbon, where a lot of Jewish refugees from all over Western Europe gathered together and waiting for transportation to the Caribbean islands. We sailed on a Portuguese ship, the Parramatta, to Suriname in Dutch Guiana, where in the harbor of Paramaribo, the capital, our ship got hit by a German G7 torpedo from the German submarine. The boat started sinking and they threw me overboard. And without knowing how to swim, I did make it to the beach. They called us all sorts of names in that place. I went to school and it was not very easy for me because always I had to change languages. Suriname is a Dutch colony, and my father immediately had to go into the Dutch West Indies Army since he was still in the army before our escape in the Netherlands. A few months later, he was ordered to travel to London, where the Dutch government escaped to, but first had to go to New York to get his instructions. My brother and myself traveled via Trinidad to New York, where we lived in a hotel until the war was finally over in 1945. When he showed up on the consulate, his orders had changed and he had to stay in New York. My father had to stay in the United States, but the three of us were the first civilians to travel by boat back to the Netherlands right after the war was over. I had to go to school and had a lot of problems because of all what happened to my family and myself. When I was 14, I started working in a knitwear factory inherited by my father and his sister that also made it through the war with her children. When I turned 20, I had interest in automobile sport and know there was a tryout to get started as a racing car driver. I rented at Schiphol Airport a car from Avis and brought it back later the same day with bald tires. People told me that I wouldn't be a perfect person without fear to a race car. I started driving long distance rallies in Europe and worked for different companies like Saab, BMW, Renault, and Fiat. I drove on all the circuits in Europe, where today the Formula One cars drive the Grand Prix. I became Dutch champion in the sports car division with Fiat Abarth, and then retired from racing. And that's why they call me today, and it started then, the fastest Jew in the world. Thank you all.
Incredible. And I don't know how you summarized your life in 10 minutes, but thank you for sharing those few memories with us. And to be arrested at the age of 7, to be in a cell with 24 men while you're being separated from your family, then to be broken out of jail by Sally Noach, only to be on a ship that then gets torpedoed. You don't know how to swim. You learn how to swim after you've been torpedoed and you get yourself to the shore. And that's before you became a race car driver. So I'm telling you, you have really, there should be a film about you. So somebody out there, make a film about Herman Vader, please. So audience, I invite you to continue adding your questions in the chat box. We will get to your questions momentarily. Right now, I'm going to just tell you about what we have upcoming in the next couple of events of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Right now, we're on an every other week schedule. So our next program is in 2 weeks' time. So that will be May 21st. May 21st, we're seeing a film called The Essential Link, which is the story of another Jewish hero. His name was Wilfred Israel. He was the scion, I guess is the right word, of an important Berlin Jewish family. They had the largest department store right in the center of Berlin. It's called N. Israel and Company. And some of these images that you will recognize from World War II of, Nazis in front of Jewish businesses, they're right there in front of this man's store. He was, I believe the store was actually facing Gestapo headquarters, again, right in the center of Berlin. He was arrested, he got himself liberated, he ended up being himself a very, very important hero. And he was one of the founders of the Kindertransport enterprise that rescued so many people. We've had several films now and programs about the Kindertransport. For some reason, Wilfred Israel's name doesn't get mentioned in these films. His involvement is just now really coming to light. And we have the world's expert on his story joining us from England. We have the filmmaker with us, and we also have a man who maintains the Wilfred Israel Museum at a kibbutz in Israel. So Wilfred Israel was involved in Escape to England. He was also involved with Youth Aliyah to Israel, to Palestine in those days, and did everything under the radar. So historians have sort of ignored him, and we should remember him and know his story, just like we should know Sally Noach's story. So that's what we have this coming program. In a few minutes, we will see a clip with the trailer to the film we're showing. Right now, let me tell you about the following program, and that's going to be June 4th. So on June 4th, we come back to France for a story not about Lyon, but about Lille, France, which is right next to Belgium. And this is a story of a spontaneous rescue network that burst into being on a critical day in 1942, when Jews were being herded onto the rail yard for deportation, and the railway workers themselves understood what was happening, and right under the noses of the Gestapo, they took action and they rescued a lot of these poor, unfortunate souls, particularly the children. So that's a film called Sauvons les enfants, which means we must save the children. Another story you'll want to know about. In that particular case, Yad Vashem has recognized these railway workers just recently in the year 2020. So stories like this are still coming to light. And that's why I'm so grateful to Jacques and people like him who bring these stories to our understanding. So right now, let's see a trailer for the upcoming film that we were going to see in 2 weeks called The Essential Link.
In the heart of Kibbutz Azorea, there is a building known as the Wilfrid House. The kibbutz founders never spoke about Wilfrid, for deep in the building's cellar, they hid a secret. Who was Wilfrid? Where did he come from? What is his connection to the kibbutz? The kibbutz founders didn't say much, but they kept everything.
מה אנחנו צריכים את הצרה הזאת?
Very hard to get an overview how rich Wilfrid was. But you can tell one thing, he was really rich.
Wherever he went, he always met the most famous people, but none of them really knew him very intimately.
Wilfrid Israel was arrested here with the so-called Junge Werkleute. That was the further founder of the kibbutz Hatzorea.
מכתבים לקוני, כתוב כאן מכתבים לקוני.
ליל הבוידר, ידעתי שהיה לו אבא נוצרי.
סבא שלך לא היה 100% יהודי.
מה הוא עשה בגרמניה, ולמה הוא נשאר עד 39, ולמה הוא עלה הרבה יותר מאוחר מאמא, לא ידענו שום דבר.
Es bestand eine Kontakt, eine Mitarbeit zwischen dem Herrlutz und der Gestapo.
We don't know the extent of that espionage relationship.
Jude, Sozialist und dann noch schwul. Wenn die Nazis ihn gekriegt hätten, er hätte keinen Tag überlebt. Also wenn die ihn ins KZ gesteckt hätten.
So now let's turn to your questions. So a question for Jacques. Jacques, can you please tell us a little bit more about your father's report that he gave to the Queen? What did he say in this report?
Well, if you resume, he tells that he's very disappointed about the voluntarity of the officials, of the Dutch officials in France, in Spain, to help the people that are on the run for the Nazis, to help them go further, either to Switzerland or to Spain, Portugal, and then to England. So, and that's what he writes down. And he gives them also, he also mentioned their names and what they did wrong. And he gives examples of things that went wrong. He gives an example of 3 young men in the right age to join the army. 3 young men he takes out of prison on the eve of Christmas 1941. He takes them out of prison and he brings them to a safe house in the southwest of France, near Toulouse, near the Spanish border, where the Dutch official lives. He knocks on the door and the answer is, please don't disturb us. It's Christmas Eve. And we can't open the door at the moment. And he's there with 3 young men starving from hunger. They were, I mean, the situation in the French camps and prisons were terrible. No food, well, whatever you can imagine. And they just said, no, come back another day. I'm busy with my Christmas tree and my whatever I do on Christmas evening. This kind of things he wrote down, and he gave it to the Queen because she told him, please make a report. And that's what disturbed the officials in the Dutch government until today, perhaps. So that's in general what he wrote down. So he told them what he was disappointed in how they worked or not worked.
Mordechai, Dr. Paldiel, can you tell us a little bit about the history of honoring Jewish rescuers? In other words, Yad Vashem doesn't honor them, correct? And why not? And how does it work to have somebody honored as a rescuer by B'nai B'rith?
Okay, first of all, I want to point out that the Netherlands was fully occupied by the Germans in May 1940. Yet the Vichy government allowed the Netherlands to have a consulate in Lyon and another city in France called Perpignan. That's very funny. They still allowed a diplomatic presence of the Dutch government, which was in London. It wasn't even in Holland. This lasted for 2 years. When the Germans took over the Vichy zone, then this was over. So this is how Sally Noach was able, when he came to the Lyon office of the Dutch government, he presented, his advantage was that he spoke 2 languages, French and Dutch. And there were a lot of Dutch refugees in France, but the Dutch consular didn't speak Dutch. He was a Frenchman. I think his name was Jacques. And so Sally Noach came there as basically as an interpreter. But then when he was sent out on a mission to free people that were imprisoned by the French police, he introduced himself as a diplomat, as the Dutch diplomat, which he was not. He was an interpreter, but he said, I'm the Dutch diplomat, and I want you to free these people. These are Dutch citizens. So this is about the presence of the Dutch diplomatic office in Lyon and Perpignan, okay? Incidentally, many people don't know that the United States and Vichy government had diplomatic relations until the end of 1941, until right after Pearl Harbor. Okay, so now to your question, Olivia, about Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem was, when Yad Vashem was created, the law, the parliament law, the Knesset law stipulated that one of the functions of Yad Vashem was to honor non-rescuers of Jews. How to honor them, that was left to Yad Vashem. It didn't state that they had to have a tree or a medal, but that's one of the functions of Yad Vashem. That's in the law of 1953, to honor people who risked their lives to save Jews. And the reference was to non-Jewish people. When I worked at Yad Vashem, there were, I came upon many stories of non-Jews who helped Jews, but in tandem with Jewish rescuers. They worked together. Like Sally Noach. He rescued Jews, but he was Jewish. How about doing something acknowledging a man like Sally Noach? He saved who knows how many hundreds of Jews and non-Jews. And he was risking his own safety. The answer of Yad Vashem is, we don't honor Jews who save Jews. We only honor non-Jews who save Jews. Yes, but you are, after all, because it doesn't say in the law. But the response by other people, but you are Yad Vashem. This is the Holocaust memorial, the national memorial. And, you know, Jewish people sometimes are very stubborn. So Yad Vashem stuck to that position. No, we don't honor Jews to save Jews. To me, it seemed a little bit of Jewish anti-Semitism, a little bit here and there. But so what happened was, I joined an organization which was created by B'nai Brit, by Alan Schneider, and they created a program for honoring Jews who saved Jews in a grand style, who saved many Jews, like Sally Noach, like Walter Susskind in Holland, who saved hundreds of Jews, okay? And he was a German Jew in Holland. And they have ceremonies, they hold ceremonies on the same day that Yad Vashem has the annual Holocaust memorial on Yom HaShoah, and the same day, B'nai Brit has a ceremony just a few miles away from Yad Vashem, where they honor certain people that they have recognized as major Jewish rescuers. So this is a funny situation, which is a little bit disturbing, that Yad Vashem has washed its hands completely off the topic of Jews who rescue Jews. And as much as we've tried to convince Yad Vashem to change its policy, so far this has not been successful. So the program goes on by the B'nai Brit organization, and Yad Vashem continues to honor non-Jewish rescuers of Jews. It's a funny situation, but that's the reality.
Okay, next question is, has the Dutch consul in Lyon, Jacques, that you mentioned, been recognized by Yad Vashem? And if not, does he deserve to be?
Whoever
wants to
Go ahead, Jacques.
All right, I know. No, he's never recognized by Yad Vashem. And while we were doing our research in Lyon in 2017, we discussed this again. In fact, I'm going to Lyon next month and see what's happening. But well, as you know, Yad Vashem is a very difficult organization. Even if you are rescuing people. You have to prove it, and well, he's dead. And to get his honor, I think he has to come out of his grave or something like that. It's very, very difficult. That's what I know. But he didn't got it. No, that's correct.
I want to add something. There might be a problem with recognizing Jacques, because one of the criteria of Yad Vashem, and I worked at this for 24 years, so I know what I'm talking about, is that a person who risked either his life or his status or his freedom while he tried to help Jews to escape from the Nazis. So there is a risk element. So the question about Jacques, did he perform his function ordinarily as he was authorized within the mandate of his function? He never went beyond that. Then Yad Vashem may decline to give him the title of the righteous. Sally Noach, of course, falsified his presence. He was Jewish. And when he came to a Vichy prison to liberate Dutch citizens, he could have been arrested himself had they known who he was. So he did risk his freedom, okay? He did risk his freedom right there and then. As far as Jacques, I'm not saying, because I have seen where Yad Vashem has honored diplomats, and I've seen where Yad Vashem has declined to honor diplomats because they weren't sure that the man went beyond the mandate of his functions, that he placed some risks upon himself, not necessarily the risk to his life, but the risk to his status, to his freedom. So I don't know what, if the case of Jacques comes before Yad Vashem, I don't know how this will be resolved.
I can give you an answer. Jacques was twice arrested by the Gestapo. The first time he was freed,
there you have
and the second time he was sent to Mauthausen, where he stayed till the end of the war. He came back in a terrible condition and died a few years later because he never recovered. So if that's not enough for Yad Vashem,
no, I'm not saying it's not enough. I have to tell you, Jacques, that the other Dutch diplomat in Perpignan, Joop Kolkman, maybe you've heard of the name.
Yeah, of course.
He was arrested by the Gestapo later on when they took over the whole of Vichy zone, and they sent him to a concentration camp, and he died there in 1944. Yeah. And he was recognized by Yad Vashem. So I think that Jacques, based on what you just said, has a good chance. Somebody has to submit the names and submit the evidence and have Yad Vashem through a commission. There's a special commission that discusses these cases, and the commission is led by a justice of the Supreme Court. So I'm not ruling anything out, and let's not rule anything out. But somebody has to place a request to Yad Vashem on Jacques.
Okay, a question for Herman. How did you end up in Florida?
How did I get to Florida?
Yes.
Well, I moved to the United States when I was 45 years old and started a new life. In the Netherlands, I did a research what I could do here in the United States. And I came up with that I only saw Wonder Bread in the grocery stores. There were no bakeries that make the European kinds of bread. So I came back to Amsterdam and went to the best bakery store over there. I said, I would like to work over here, but you don't have to pay me. And I started making all the breads that you see today in the different stores. And I went and became a pastry chef. At that time, I was almost ready to move to the United States, and a friend of mine who lives in Antwerp, Belgium, called me, and he says to me, listen, Herman, what the heck are you doing? You're 45 and you got to get up at 11 o'clock every night to bake bread. He says, I am opening up a diamond wholesale place in Los Angeles. Your family that all died during World War II was in the diamond business. Why don't you go over there and do and make sales in diamonds, travel United States and sell to the jewelry stores? I went to Belgium. I studied. I'm a graduate from in diamonds, like GIA. I went to the United States. I started my business, and that went all very well. I got married and with a flight attendant who works for American Airlines. And American Airlines opened a base here in Florida. And so we moved to Florida about 35 years ago. And I am retired. I'm old enough to retire. I'm almost 87.
So one last question from the chat box, and then we'll go to our final thoughts from our speakers. So this is a question for Jacques, which is, did the cash that your father had to use to facilitate the various actions come from his own personal wealth, or was it provided to him by the Dutch government or another source?
Yeah, well, the Dutch government was not very anxious to give money, to provide money, but he had a very good contact with the with a high ranked Dutch military officer in Switzerland, and he provided, and they arranged a kind of black money circuit between Switzerland and Lyon, and from that money he paid all kind of expenses. Furthermore, he had good contacts in Lyon with people he worked with. My father was a businessman, and Lyon is the head of the silk industry. So he had very good contact with people over there, and they were willing and able to fund money for the refugees. It was in fact, a very strange, touching situation that my father went out to his French business relations, asked money for the Dutch refugees because the Dutch government didn't want to pay for it. So that's in short the question about the money circuit that went around.
So I'd like to give the speakers an opportunity to say some final thoughts. This means we will run over by just a few minutes, so please stay with us out of courtesy to our wonderful panel. So Mr. Herman Veder, why don't you go first and let us know what you'd like to say to our audience?
Well, my audience and you, Olivia, I want to say thank you to you and your wonderful team. Matt was terrific. He helped me so much on the computer. And then I would like to thank, and I know a few of them, or one of them for sure is watching. I want to thank 3 cardiologists that helped me stay alive lately. One is Ellie Levine here in Boca Raton, Michael Schechter here in Boca Raton, and the electric part of the heart was taken care of by Joel Vivas, who lives in Del Rey. You guys did a wonderful job for me, and I cannot thank you enough. And whatever the cost is, it's well worth it, because living is better than 6 feet under. I also want to wish Michael a good trip this week. God bless everybody.
Jacques, what would you like to say to our audience in closing?
Well, I have some final thoughts, and I would like to say that my father was the living example of so many Jews who fought the enemy in spite of the very strange position in which they found themselves. And my father, Sally Noach, was one of the people who stood up and who crossed the fear barrier. And I don't think that the post-war generations will ever be able to comprehend the full extent of what those who resisted, like my father and many others, meant to their fellow men. But what we can do is express our intense gratitude to them, because they had the courage to resist. And we need to promise one another to remain vigilant, so that what happened can never happen again. But these last words we say too often and too much, and unfortunately it happens again every day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mordechai, what would you like to say in closing?
Yes, first I would like to refer again to honoring Jewish rescuers of Jews. I mean, the claim had been made by Yad Vashem and others. A Jew who helps a fellow Jew, it's not a big deal. He's obligated to do it. A Jew has to help a fellow Jew. So there's nothing to talk about. That's such a ridiculous statement. Sally Noach, he didn't have to go out and help. When he was in Lyon, he could have gone immediately and crossed into Spain and helped himself. He didn't have to put his life in danger vis-a-vis the Vichy government for such a long time. What do you mean he's obligated? In a time of danger, maybe a person is obligated to help himself first. And if he doesn't do that and goes out and helps others, that makes a big difference. So I want to end also, and I want to say that, you know, theologians are always asking themselves about the Holocaust. Where was God? How did God allow a man like Hitler to come into power? How did God allow Auschwitz? Where was God? And Emmanuel Levinas, French Jewish theologian who's no longer here, has written about the face of the others. I say, you know where God was? He was with those people who risked their lives and they saved others. They could have been shot, they could have been killed, and they had families. That's where God was, with people like Sally Noach. As I said, Sally Noach didn't have to do it. Nobody told him to do it. He didn't do it because he knew that one day he was going to be honored posthumously by B'nai B'rith, and yet he did it because he felt that he had to do it. So who gave him that idea? I say it was God. The Spirit of God was with those people. And let us hope that we have many more people like Sally Noach and the others, Jews and non-Jews, who stood up against the Nazi regime because they felt this was the right thing to do. This is where God was with them.
Wow. Well, another hour has flown by, and I'd love to do a whole other program on Mr. Veder and learn more about his life, because there is no other life that's been lived like yours, Herman, and it's a privilege to know you. So thank you to our three wonderful speakers, and thank you to our audience that comes now every 2 weeks. So please join us again 2 weeks from now. You will be getting an email after today's program with information on how to sign up. And so have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody, and see you next time. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.